As we conclude the series, we do so with a message titled Against the Ropes. And if you've watched any amount of boxing, you'll know that there are typically in a boxing match comes a point where one of the fighters, and typically each of them will have their turn being up against the ropes. Now, if you've watched any fighting, typically when someone is up against the ropes, they start to take a somewhat defensive position, right? Because if you're pressed up against the ropes, you're not thinking, okay, this is my offensive strategy. You're a lot of times thinking, okay, this is my opportunity to kind of duck. But what you'll see is that a good fighter will still look for opportunity. They will never be just so much defensive that they won't be looking for, okay, they threw, it glanced off the side of my head, they're a little bit off balance. This is going to be my opportunity to push back, to throw a punch, and to continue to fight. And so if you're up against the ropes today and you feel like, you know what, this is about going to be the end, I want to encourage you that it's not the end, that God has a plan for you. I want to review the last 4 weeks. And I'm going to do this in a somewhat quick fashion. You'll remember the first week we said, you know what, everyone can fight. And so we said, put up your dukes, be willing to join the fight. It's not going to be an easy fight. Yes, it's going to be challenging, and yes, it's going to be a difficult fight, but we want you to be willing to say, okay, I'm on the outside of the ring. I'm going to be willing to get on the inside of the ring, put on the gloves, and fight again. We said, you know, your feelings, you're not going to always feel like doing what's right. You're not going to always feel like continuing in this fight. So you have to allow truth to win out over feelings. The second week, and so that first week we were talking about Gideon. Remember, and whenever we said he was the least in his family, his clan was the least in the tribe. It was the weakest in the tribe. And so, like, of all the people, Gideon didn't seem like the likely one. But we said anybody can fight because God chose to use Gideon. Second week, we talked about David and Goliath. And how do you fight a giant? Well, you see the giant from a new perspective. Remember, David, when he saw Goliath, he didn't see the height of Goliath. He didn't see the size of Goliath. He didn't see anything other than an enemy of God. And we said those things that are kind of weighing you down in life, those things that are pushing you up against the ropes, you need to not just see them as like obstacles. You need to not just see them as temptations or weaknesses. You need to see them as the enemy of God. So be willing to train. We said a lot of times we're very spiritually lazy. We aren't willing to read our Bibles to see, okay, God, how would you like to direct my life on a daily basis? We aren't willing to even punch in a simple Google search to say, okay, I know I struggle with fill in the blank. So you put that struggle, and then after you say Bible verses. So I struggle with anger, Bible verses. And you'll be surprised. It'll give you a slew of verses that you can write down and you can memorize. And we said, you know what, be willing to fight just like David did. We talked about being willing to train to fight. And we said, okay, whenever it comes to you, this was when we started looking at Samson. And we said, whenever it comes to you, do you know your areas of weakness and temptation? Because one of the biggest things about being able to fight is knowing yourself. What we realized as we looked at the life of Samson is that although it seems like it should have been glaringly obvious, he didn't know himself. Or if he did know himself, he didn't care. He didn't take any measure of protection. And so we asked, well, what about you? Do you know your areas of weakness and temptation? And if so, are you doing anything about those? And so that was the third week. Last week, we said sometimes we make the fight harder than what it needs to be. We said, you know what? Sometimes we don't see our commitment to God and take it very seriously. And that's what we saw from Samson. Like, okay, part of the Nazirite vow that we know that Samson had upon his life throughout from the very beginning. I mean, God had come to Manoah, who was his father, and to Manoah's wife and said, all right, hey, from the time this baby is born, like, I want to use him to, like, free you from the Philistines. He's going to start that process of getting you from underneath the oppression of the Philistines. So he's going to have a Nazirite vow upon him. Part of that Nazirite vow was you stay away from anything that has to do with the fruit of the vine. So no grapes, no raisins, no wine, no grape juice. Stay away from all of that. And we saw that Samson, whenever he went down to Timnah, what did he do? He went through the vineyard. Now, why would you go through a vineyard when you have to stay away from grapes, when you have to stay away from he didn't take his commitment seriously. Now, we saw also that, like, part of that was, and these three all tied together, because he didn't take his commitment seriously, he didn't take sin seriously. And we kind of live in a culture that says you don't need to take sin seriously. And one of the slogans I love from New Hope is the slogan, "No perfect people allowed." But one of the downfalls of that slogan is that whenever we say out loud, like, "No perfect people allowed," everybody's like, "Oh, okay, well, then I can just do whatever I want." And that's kind of like what Paul says. He's like, well, should I sin so that grace can abound and God can be more gracious and he can show me how loving he is? Because, like, hey, if I can just keep sinning and sinning and he keeps on loving and grace, and Paul says, should I keep sinning so that grace can abound? And do you remember what he says? God forbid. Like, absolutely not. How ludicrous is that? And so, like, sin is serious. We want you to know that you can come and you can be loved here. But part of that love is to say, we love you too much to leave you where you are. And that was Jesus' message, right? I love you too much to leave you in your sin. So I'm going to come and I'm going to do something about that sin so that you can be rescued from it. So why would you continue to live in it? But Samson, he just didn't view sin all that seriously. And he didn't realize that, you know what, you make one small compromise and it leads to another compromise and it leads to another and another. And so we encourage you, like, to take sin seriously, to avoid compromises, and to value your commitment to God. So today, we're going to wrap up the account of Samson, and I'm going to summarize a lot of it for you because it takes about 3 chapters for the account of Samson to be wrapped up. And we're going to get to Judges 16, but if you have your Bibles, turn in your Bibles real quick here to Judges chapter number 14. Judges chapter number 14. The large amount of the account of Samson is in 14, 15, and 16. 13 is the account of the angel coming to his parents saying, you're going to have a child. So in 14, we kind of at the beginning of the chapter, this is where we spent the last couple of weeks. You remember he sees a woman, says, I want her to be my wife. Haven't even met her yet, but mom and dad go get her to be my wife. He actually then goes down, and we saw the compromises that we talked about just a moment ago. So he goes back to marry her. And whenever he goes back, remember he had killed a lion the first time. When he goes back, he sees this lion's carcass. He gets honey out of it, remember? And then he continues on, and he goes down, and he's about to marry this woman. And they had like a 7-day feast that would take place. And so he gives this riddle. He's given 30 attendants, 30 people to kind of help get him ready for this wedding. I think when I got married, I had some people that were in the bridal party that were with me, but I don't think anybody helped me get ready for anything. This is not the right approach, guys. And so I'll just say that right up front. Like, for my wedding, I basically told Kim, like, hey, you get everything ready. I'll show up. But you got everything else. Like, I don't need to make a single decision. You do whatever you want. You tell me what day I'm supposed to be there. You tell me what I'm supposed to wear, and I'll be there. And she really, she did. And she even told me, she's like, don't wear your glasses to our wedding. She's like, put your contacts in. I'm like, all right, I'll make sure I don't wear my glasses. And if you'll see pictures of, I look like something else with my glasses. We're not going to go there, but hey, I'm just going to. Samson gets 30 people to get him ready. Well, he says to those 30 people, I've got a riddle for you. And if you can solve this riddle, I'll give you 30 changes of clothes. I'll get a set of clothes for all of you. But if you can't solve this riddle, you give me 30 sets of clothes. And so they say, all right, fair enough. We have 7 days to solve a riddle. Figure we can do it. Now, all right, let me just ask you, if you have 7 days, how many of you think you can solve most riddles? Wow, you guys have less confidence than I. If somebody would have said, like, hey, Dave, I give you 7 days. You think you can solve a riddle? I'm taking that every time. I'm like, I'll sit there and I won't even sleep. I would just think and think and think, and I'll ask other people, and like I'll be on Google, and I'll do whatever I need to do to figure out this riddle. Like, you ever had somebody say, hey, I got a riddle, and then like, I don't know, 3 minutes later, you want me to give you the answer? No. I don't want you to give me the answer. I want to figure this out myself. Anybody kind of like that at all? All right, I got a few people with me. All right. So these 30 guys, they're like, we'll take you up on that bargain. You tell us the riddle. If we don't solve it in 7 days, we'll give you 30 sets of clothes. If we do, you give us 30 sets. Well, if you know the story, then you know the account, you'll know that he gives them the riddle, and the riddle goes something like this. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Now, he had killed a lion, right? So out of the eater, the lion, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Now, I'll be honest. If I didn't know this account, and you just told me that, I'm pretty sure I don't figure that out in 7 days. I just don't think I do. And so they're getting frustrated. So they go to this woman who's going to be his wife. And they say, listen, here's the deal. You better get this out of him. And if you don't get this out of him, we're going to kill you and your family. And so she starts to plead with Samson and says, like, listen, don't you love me? If you loved me, you'd tell me the answer to this riddle. And you know how it goes, guys. He eventually breaks. He says, I haven't even told my parents. Like, why would I tell you? And he eventually tells her, and then what do you think she does? She tells them, they solve the riddle, and he gets angry. So he says, now you got to remember, God's purpose for the life of Samson was what? To begin the deliverance from the Philistines. And so God is using all of this for his purpose, and so he has to give 30 sets of clothes to these men. So you know what he does? He goes and kills 30 Philistines, takes their clothes, and gives them to these men. He obviously has a bit of an anger problem. At the same time, we realize God wanted them delivered from the Philistines. God has an amazing way of using even the terrible events of our lives to bring about his purposes. Like, only God can do the things that he does. And some of us, maybe all of us, have experienced that. Like, some of the worst things of our life, he has brought around to be good. And so this takes place. And so, like, Samson has left in a rage. This woman's father thinks, oh, okay, well, Samson doesn't want to be married to her anymore. He actually gives Samson's wife to his friend, to Samson's friend, one of his attendants from the wedding. And so now Samson, this gets into chapter number 15 now. So if you're following along just kind of casually in your Bible, that's where we're getting. So in 15, Samson, after he gets done being angry, he goes back and he goes to his wife's father and says, I want to see my wife. And the father's like, well, I didn't think you wanted anything to do with her, so I gave her away to another man. But she has a sister. You can marry the sister. Well, this just, again, infuriates Samson. And so he is angry about this. He goes out and he catches 300 foxes. And what he does is he ties them together in pairs. He ties their tails together and he lights them on fire. And he sends them through the grain fields to burn up all of the crops of the Philistines. So Samson's like, I'm going to get revenge on this one way or another. Okay, well, do you think that angers the Philistines? Yes, it angers the Philistines. And so the Philistines are like, we gotta get rid of this guy. Like, Samson is causing us nothing but trouble. And so Samson has at this point gone and he's in Judah and he's kind of hiding out in the mountains. And so the Philistines go to the people of Judah and say, you need to get him and deliver him to us. So 3,000 men from Judah go down. They're looking for Samson. 3,000 of them. They go to get Samson, and Samson says, like, hey, here's the deal. Like, I'm willing to go with you. You can tie me up. Just promise me this. Don't kill me yourselves. Make sure that you make the Philistines do it. And so the people from Judah take Samson towards the Philistines. The Philistines start coming at him. Samson is ridiculously strong because God is with him, and so he rips apart the ropes, and he grabs the jawbone of a donkey, and he kills 1,000 Philistines. You say, well, these, I mean, if you're sitting there thinking like this could never happen, kind of like what I said last week, for an individual, you're right. Like, one person can't do this kind of stuff. But God had a special purpose, and God was on Samson's life. The Spirit of God, you see it time and time, it says the Spirit of God came upon him. And when you see him eventually lose his strength, I don't want to tell too much of the story, I'll get there in a second. But when you see him eventually lose his strength, you'll see the phrase, and the Lord left him. So he's killed 1,000 of these Philistines. And this is just kind of the way that it works a lot of times. You'll see a great victory, then you'll see some mild depression. You'll see this with a lot of Old Testament saints. Do you remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Like, God had given this great victory against the 400 prophets of Baal, and yet he flees, and he goes into this great depression because of Jezebel, who is supposed to be after him. And it's like, why after a great victory do you so often see people kind of go into either a bit of a lull or actually into a bit of a time of depression? And so often it's because coming off of a mountaintop can be really, really tough for individuals. And so Samson, he kills 1,000 of them, but he doesn't have any water with him. And so he said, what are you going to do, God? You going to let me die? Like, die of thirst? And so God provides water for him. That ends up chapter number 15. And we're going to get into chapter number 16 together today. So do you guys have at least a general idea? You got an understanding of this guy Samson is no ordinary guy. He's accomplished part of what God has put him there for. You'll see, and then I guess the last verse, let me read this, of chapter number 15 says, Samson led Israel, or judged Israel. We're in the book of Judges. They're oftentimes called judges. So he led Israel for 20 years in the day of the Philistines. So we get into chapter number 16. Let's read together. One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. Now, you know from our previous studies that many people in the Old Testament seem to get drugged down by sexual sin. We said early in the life of Samson that he was unusually drawn to women, and he should have known this about himself. And so you see him coming and he sees a prostitute, and instead of saying like, oh, I know my weaknesses, I know my areas of temptation, I need to avoid this. No, instead it says he went in to spend the night with her. And so again, we said previously he was unusually drawn to women. He was impulsive. We see that kind of all throughout. And he ignored advice and wisdom. Well, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. Again, we're still in Judges 16. Verse number 5 says, the rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. This would have made her a very, very wealthy woman. Now, let's think back for a moment. What was Samson's downfall whenever he was marrying this first woman? And he told the riddle, and they couldn't solve the riddle. Who eventually got him to give that up? It was his wife, right? Now, do not draw the conclusion that wives are bad for us. That's the wrong conclusion from this. Samson, he had a habit of repeating his same failures. It wasn't a good habit. So Delilah now is being offered great wealth if she can get Samson to give up the secret to his strength. So Samson's area of weakness. What do you think? Is it obvious to you? It's pretty obvious to me, and I think it was fairly obvious to everyone else. Why do you think the Philistines went to Delilah? Because Samson had shown that over and over and over again, he had a weakness, he had a special, unusual, impulsive desire towards women. And so these Philistines know, like, hey, if we're going to get to him, it's going to be through women. And he has the thing for Delilah now, and so, all right, here we go. Now, Samson should have known that about himself. He should have. But for some reason or another, it just seems as if he wasn't aware, or he didn't care about his area of weakness. And I want to kind of, all throughout, kind of bring this to a place of application for you. we have throughout this series encouraged you to be honest with yourself about your areas of weakness. Teenagers, are you willing to acknowledge your areas of weakness and temptation? We have a couple in here, recent graduates. You guys are getting ready to go into the military. There's going to be some challenges in front of you and opportunities that could either be good opportunities for you to live out your faith or opportunities to compromise. And so do you know yourselves well enough to be able to say, I need to avoid that. I need to not go there. You'll find quickly who people are. I need to not spend so much time with this individual. And so I say that to all of us. We should be very, very aware of our areas of weakness. In fact, you guys have your index card with you. Anybody not get an index card as you came in today? Just raise your hand real quick. All right, so we've got a few people. Can I get James and Kevin? Can you guys grab some of those index cards? Anybody need a writing utensil? Just throw up your hands, grab some pens, grab some index cards, help us out. We've got some here. One of you go this way, one of you go that way. All right, and so the first thing I want you to be honest about, and part of writing things down is a certain measure of solidifying it. Like when you jot it down on paper, how many of you have ever made an appointment with someone and you didn't put it in your calendar? Anybody ever done that? Anybody ever forgotten one of those appointments where you're like, oh, I'll remember that? I have done that. I have tried to make a habit now of saying I have to put it, regardless of how simple it is, regardless of how much I think I might remember. Anybody else need anything before they head back? Doug, you do? All right, what do you need up here? He needs both. All right, Kevin, you got something? We're getting some more pens? All right, sounds great. All right, so the first thing I want you to jot down on your card is the answer to this question. What's your area of weakness? Or what are your areas of weakness? And I'm not going to collect these cards. No one else is going to look at them. This is not about being able to like, oh, okay, well, I know what they struggle with. Nothing like, I'm not going to collect them. I'm not going to look at them. Not going to ask you to share them with anybody. But this is just right up here with Doug. You guys get Doug yet? All right. Doug doesn't like to raise his hand, so he kind of... All right, so area of weakness. You had an opportunity to jot that down. Samson should have known it. If you don't feel like you have an area of weakness, if you are near your spouse, I just want you to turn to your spouse for a moment and say, honey or dear or the love of my life, what's my area of weakness? And you may get a response like this, honey, we ain't got time for that right now. When we have an hour or so later, like, let's talk. But no, seriously, like if you don't know your areas of weakness, trust me, those who are close to you do. If you have a good friend, ask your friend, what do you think's my area of weakness? I had a teenager in my youth department back in Pennsylvania, and she was actually a lot like Samson in that she was impulsive. And whenever she went for something, like she was all in. And so, and you guys will never know any of these people, and so I'm not going to use names, but just like I would never, I guess the reason I say this is like I would never, like if you share something with me, it's not like I'm going to come back the next week and be like, hey, I got this person in our church, and here's the deal. And you're able to figure that out. No, I say this because you'll never meet these people. So I had this teenager who was very impulsive. And when she went for something, like, she was all in. And so, like, if a guy expressed interest in her at all, like, that was it. Like, wow, we are together forever. And it's like, you literally just met this guy. And so she had a brother. And her brother, who actually is now a pastor, her brother was going through a time when he's like, you know what, I'm going to push the boundaries of my life. I want to push those a little bit. And so he decided, you know what, yeah, I don't want to go out and get drunk, but I want to kind of have my time of experimentation with alcohol. And so he was inviting his sister down. This is after they graduated. He was inviting his sister to his place one time. And me and this, I call him a kid. He's not a kid anymore. Me and this guy, we're pretty tight. pretty tight. I called him kind of my second youth pastor when he was underneath me in youth ministry. And so I called him up and I said, hey, listen, I know that this girl, I know your sister's coming to spend some time with you. I also know you've been trying to push your boundaries with some things. You can say this is right, you can say this is wrong. I wouldn't do this with a lot of people, but I had a really close relationship with him. I said, if you so much as think about offering her alcohol, you and I are going to have a problem. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? I'm like, you know how impulsive your sister is. And if she likes it, she's not going to stop. I said, and I hold you personally responsible if she becomes an alcoholic. And he was just kind of taken off guard, but he said, I get it. I get where you're coming from. And so I say all that to say this, like other people can see your areas of weakness. And this girl and I, we were close enough that I was able to talk to her. Kim was able to talk to her about her areas of weakness too. And so I say, like, if you think you don't have any areas of weakness or you don't know what they are, ask those who are close to you. They can point them out. These folks could have pointed out Samson's. So the first thing you need to do if you're going to fight back when you're up against the ropes, be willing to acknowledge your areas of weakness. Maybe what I would call blind spots in your own life, and that's why you have to ask somebody else, like, hey, you see anything here? And give them freedom to be honest with you. Because how many of you have like asked for input and then really not liked it? And anybody ever been there? I've done that before, yeah. Give them freedom. Be honest. Tell me what they are. All right, so continuing on in Judges 16, Delilah says to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking red flag, red flag, red flag. Like, is anybody else, like, you're reading this and you're thinking, like, don't do it, Samson, don't do it, Samson, red flag, red flag, red flag. Honestly, though, like, you guys have probably had those come up in your life where you're like, oh, red flag, that's all right, I can handle. Red flag, I can handle. Red flag. Yeah, we look at, I was having a conversation last week with someone as they were walking out, and they were saying, like, I don't get why Samson, like, I said, I know, right? Like, we can look at Samson and say, what was he thinking? And then we kind of just bring it back to ourselves, and it's like, I'm pretty sure I've done some of those things. Not repeated the exact things, but like the red flags and keeping going anyway. Yeah, I've been there. So Samson answered her. How many of you have read or you know the account of Samson? All right, a number of you. Okay, well, it's not nearly as fun for you as it is for maybe the rest. All right, so Samson answers and says, well, I tell you what, if anybody ties me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man. So the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. Surprise, surprise, right? With men hidden in the room, she called him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. All right, so he gives her a false story. He says, hey, I tell you what, the key to my strength is tie me up with these 7 new bowstrings. I won't be able to do anything about it. She does it. The Philistines come, and he's able to break loose. So Delilah says to Samson, now, you've made a fool of me. You've made a fool of me? At this point, I mean, I'm thinking, Samson, like, she's not the one that's being made a fool of, dude. Like, you are. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied. Red flag, red flag, red flag. Like, I don't know. So he does this, and I'm just going to kind of bounce forward. He does it 2 more times. He gives a false story 2 more times. And 2 more times she like calls in the Philistines. And 2 more times he busts loose and like she's like, oh, how can you do that to me? And I'm thinking, okay. So 2 more times, and then finally she starts to like really play this pity party. And I guess at this point I'm saying like, okay, you guys probably all know this verse that no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He'll not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. check this out. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out. How many of you feel like Samson had a way out? Like, red flag, red flag. I think I need to get out of this situation. She obviously doesn't have my best interest at heart. Like, this has happened 3 times, and like, I've gotten tied up, or they've done this. The one time he said, weave my hair to the thing, and I won't be able to do anything. And so that happens, and he busts loose from that too. Listen, God gives us more ways out than we ever care to acknowledge. Now, people twist this verse all the time and say, well, God says he'll never give us more than we can handle. This is talking about temptation. Temptation. God a lot of times gives us more than we can handle in life. Let's just be honest. Why does he do that? This isn't even part of my message. This is just bonus. All right, bonus material right here. Why does God, or why would God give us more than we can handle? To rely on him. If we only faced the things in life that we could handle on our own, why would we ever feel the strong need for God? So don't buy into this lie that you'll see promoted over and over and over again, that God says he'll never give us more than we can handle. That's not in Scripture. It's just not. Try to find it. It ain't there. God will oftentimes give you more than you can handle on your own, so you must rely on him. When it comes to temptation, we see very clearly that he'll, when you're tempted, provide a way out so that you can stand up underneath it. You know what that might be? In the form of you being at a party you shouldn't be at and getting a call from your mom or a text from your dad, and you're like, man, this is a weird time for them to be reaching out to me. And it's like, oh, wow, maybe that's your way out. Maybe it's an opportunity in a moment of anger that there's something that happens that causes you to be able to pause and walk away from a situation. Maybe it's that opportunity that you have whenever you're considering doing something. Maybe husbands, maybe you're considering allowing your minds to wander towards another woman. And God reminds you that no, like you should have eyes only for your wife. Guys, if you're married, I hope that when your wife wakes up and she looks hideous, like her hair goes more directions than you could ever possibly imagine it going, I hope you look at her with like this, oh my word, that's my wife and she is hot. That's eyes only for your wife. For no other woman. And so like when you consider like allowing your eyes to be drawn towards other women, or maybe for some of you ladies, like the emotional connection you have started to have with a coworker, and you're starting to share your problems with your coworker whenever you should be sharing those things with your spouse, like, and God gives you a moment when he reminds you, like, no, your emotions should be connected to your spouse. Maybe God gives you those times of pause. And he says, listen, when you're tempted, he'll provide you a way out. We all agree Samson had his way. He just didn't take it. And so stop saying it's more than you can handle and start taking God's way out. Start fighting against those impulses that you have. And you say, well, that's just who I am. I'll never be able to change. Yes, you can. That's what this whole series is about, is acknowledging your weaknesses. Being willing to say, yes, those things have knocked me down time and time again. I've been counted to 7 before as I'm laying there on the mat, and I'm deciding whether or not I'm going to get up before the 8 count is kind of given to me. And God says, I'm not done with you yet. I don't know if you listen to Christian radio or not, but there's a song called Unfinished that's just recently come out. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, you can Google it. I'm sure you can listen to it that way. But it's called Unfinished. Like, I encourage you to realize God's not done with you yet. If you have a background in growing up in church, maybe you realize or have sung the song, He's still working on me, right? To make me what I ought to be. And so, regardless, I want you to know that Samson was given a way out, and you oftentimes are too. I encourage you to take it. Take that way out. So we all have blind spots, and oftentimes we miss or ignore God's way out. We just continue to struggle and to fall into the same patterns of sin like Samson did. So Delilah says to Samson, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me?" Okay. This is the third time you've made a fool of me. We're getting on to the fourth time when he's going to give her an answer. But he's already had 3. So she says, "This is the third time you've made a fool of me, and you haven't told me the secret of your great strength." And at this point, anybody that would be counseling him would say, "Don't do it. Don't tell her." With such nagging, we're not staying there. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. Don't laugh. No, you're not allowed to laugh at that. No, Tony, you're not. No. I'm telling you, men, stop. Women, you can laugh all you want. Men, don't even crack us. No. Oh, you guys are not listening to me today. So he's been nagged about to death. And sometimes when it comes to those temptations, like we feel like they hit us over and over and over again from a lot of different directions, and we're feeling a little bit worn down. We're feeling like our strength is waning. We're feeling like we're in round 10 of 12 and like, I don't know how much fight I have left in me. Oh, so Samson, he tells her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head." Now, if you would go back to Numbers chapter number 6, part of the Nazirite vow was that you weren't allowed to have your hair cut. So, "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." So when Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she, surprise, surprise, sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. Having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." And this is what I referenced earlier. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. He didn't know. The Philistines, they seized him. They gouged out his eyes, took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding in the prison. Samson, who had led the Israelites for 20 years, who had the Spirit of God upon him in great power and great strength. Samson, who had so much opportunity in front of him, and yet didn't realize the seriousness of giving in to his weaknesses, his temptations, his impulses, didn't see sin as a serious thing, didn't think it was any big deal to compromise. And listen, I have been in ministry long enough, and I have watched people live out their lives long enough to know that this is normal. It is normal for you to think it won't happen to me. I would never do that. Some of you have allowed those words to actually come out of your mouths. Like, I would never allow myself to do that. I would never find myself in that situation. I would never treat my family like that. I would never, and you just fill in the blank. But then we make small compromises. And then we start to not view sin as seriously as what it should be viewed. And we find ourselves maybe not grinding in a prison, but grinding in life. And we find ourselves in a place that we would have never thought we would have been. And that's where Samson has found himself. You say, well, that's a terrible end to the story. Kind of stinks for the life of Samson to be wrapped up there, doesn't it? A life that's filled with promise, a life that's wasted, a life that's beyond redemption. Now, if you know the story of Samson, you know that I'm not being serious right about now. This actually isn't the end. I just wanted you to have a moment of dramatic pause where you're like, really? That's how it ended? No, not really. So he's there, and his hair begins to grow. The temple's crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines are there. On the roof, there are about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. They've brought Samson just to entertain him, just to kind of make a mockery of him, having a big feast. So Samson prays to the Lord, and he says, "Oh, sovereign Lord, remember me." Like, do you remember me? I know I've failed. He says, God, please strengthen me just once more. Let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And what you're going to find, and I'm not going to read the rest of it for you, but you're going to find that he asked them to help him find the center pillars of that temple where all these people are. He says, God, give me the strength one more time. And God gives him strength. And he, with one renewal of strength, he knocks down those pillars. The temple collapses. It says that he killed more Philistines in his death than he did in his life. You have a card, that index card in front of you. And I've asked you to put your area of weakness or your areas of weakness. And now I'm going to, team, can you come up and just kind of start playing in the background, getting ready to sing? I know I should have prepared you for that earlier, but if you guys could do that, that would be awesome. Because here's what I want you to do. I'm going to pray in just a moment. And I want you to start processing, and I actually want you to write it down. What's your prayer? What's your prayer to God? Like Samson found himself grinding in the prison. He found himself in a place that he didn't want to be. He was up against the ropes, so to speak. And he prays and he says, God, can you give me strength just this one more time? And so I want you to start processing, and I want you to actually write down your prayer on that index card. God, here's my area of weakness. Would you do this for me? And maybe it's a short-term prayer. Maybe it's, God, this week, I need you to keep me from getting angry. God, there's a lot going on at home. Finances are tight. God, I last week just lost it too many times. And God, I need your help. Maybe it's a prayer that goes something like this. God, I have the tendency when I get online to visit pages I shouldn't visit. And so, God, I pray that you would help me to be morally pure this week. Maybe it's a prayer that says, you know what, I have not been fulfilling my responsibilities as a man. I have been allowing the spiritual direction of my family to just be taken by whoever would be willing to step up and lead. And so, God, I pray that you put within me a desire and an ability and a strength to lead my family the way I need to lead them. Maybe it's a simple prayer as simple as this. God, I'm up against the ropes and I just need strength. I need strength to make it through each day. Because quite honestly, I'm at that point that Pastor Dave talked about earlier where I've got more than I can bear. And so God, I'm going to put this weight on your shoulders and ask you to bear it for me. So I mean, I've given you a lot of examples, but quite honestly, I don't live your life. I don't go to work with you each day. I try to love you and I try to pray for you and understand you. But you know yourself better than I know you. And you know the prayer that you need to be declaring to God. So we're going to be singing a song. It's called Good, Good Father. And I want you to know that God hasn't given up on you. He didn't give up on Samson. I tell you what, he gave Samson that strength. And so I need you to know that God wasn't done with Samson, and he's not done with you. You aren't strong enough. You aren't powerful enough to take yourself out of the hands of Almighty God, to get yourself to a point where he can't help you. You ain't that good. So today's your day that maybe in full surrender you say, God, I release it to you. I release it to you. So you can stay seated as we begin this song. If you want to stand right away, you can. I just encourage you, write out a prayer to God. I am not going to collect these. This is between you and God, but there's something about putting it down that solidifies it. And if you don't do it here, I strongly encourage you, before this day ends, do it at home. Do it for yourself. Do it for your family. Do it for those that love you. Do it for the purpose that God has for you. So God, I pray over these, your people. Lord, as we wrap up this series that we've titled The Fight, and you have shown us that everyone can fight regardless of how many times they've been knocked down. You've even shown us today that, okay, yes, we likely have blind spots, those areas that we need to acknowledge, those areas of temptation that we've given into again and again. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to be willing to take the way of escape that you give to us. And then I pray that we would just have as our declaration that we want you on our side fighting for us and giving us strength to make it through each and every day. So God, I pray that you would help everyone to take what they have heard, that your Holy Spirit would allow it to be impressed upon the minds of everyone, and that it would work into our hearts so that we can live it out. I pray this in Jesus' name.